Hello, and welcome to Around the Political World with John Rothman. I am your host, John Rothman. If you're a fan of the show, make sure to hit the follow button on the top right of Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you are listening at this very moment. When you hit follow, leave a review or share an episode with a friend. It helps other people discover the show, keeps us going. As I like to remind you each and every day, it expands our base. The world continues to marvel at what is happening in the Middle East. The President of the United States announced a ceasefire. But of course, announcing a ceasefire is very different than implementing a ceasefire. And let me remind you that a ceasefire is not peace, it is a ceasefire. I raise this issue because I know that Donald Trump has done a decisive, powerful thing in the Middle East. His decision to assist the Israelis in taking out the Iranian nuclear capability was a right decision. No question about it. President Trump did the right thing and deserves kudos for doing that. However, let's bear in mind that what Donald Trump is after is something that is quite elusive, and that is a genuine ceasefire and peace in the Middle East. Remember, please, that the Iranian bottom line remains the destruction of Israel. They don't want a peace treaty. They don't want a ceasefire. They don't even want to talk to the Israelis. They want to see what they call the Zionist entity destroyed. And as a result, we are caught on the horns of a great dilemma. This morning, the president used an expletive. It begins with F and ends with K, and it's not fork. Donald Trump blasted the Israelis, and I believe in his own way understands clearly that his hope for a Nobel Peace Prize is, more elusive than ever. We have to remember that when the Declaration of Principles was signed in September of 1993 by the Israelis and the PLO, there was hope, real hope, genuine belief that peace might be breaking out in the Middle East. And of course, peace did not break out in the Middle East. What happened was continued violence, violence which we see extending even to this day. There is hope in the Middle East because Iran's nuclear ambitions have been defanged because of an operation by the Israelis of devastating impact. And I'm not just talking about the military bomb dropping. I'm talking about the removal of key Iranian officials. Iran has essentially been crippled, which is a good thing in my judgment. The question of regime change continues to plague us. Remember that if you really believe that regime change makes a difference, well, you don't know your history. There is a probability, indeed a possibility, that just maybe, the Iranian people will rise up and throw out the mullahs. And that would be wonderful. But if they don't, well, the problem continues. So my thoughts this morning are very clear. Donald Trump, keep your eye on the ball. Forget about the Nobel Peace Prize. I know it would be a crowning ambition. I want you to consider only this, that Israel must live, and that when you use an expletive, which I have described a moment ago, involving the Israelis, you're not gaining confidence from Israeli people. I listened this morning to a very good friend of mine in Jerusalem, Tracy Shipley, who offered an eloquent statement that Israel will determine its own policy, that it appreciates help, but in the end, the Israelis have to do it themselves. And that is, my friends, the bottom line. I want to talk about another matter, not nearly as in the headlines as it ought to be, and that is what Donald Trump has described as that great, big, beautiful bill. That bill will entail a lot of very interesting and dramatic changes if it passes, including the sale of pristine land currently possessed by the federal government, which would now go up for private sale. Roads through forests and such, talked about actively now by the Trump administration. And there's more. There are cuts in Medicaid, which will have a divisive and decisive effect on millions of Americans. And there is more. Really, the expansion of presidential power in terms of implementing his agenda. And the fact is that if the Republicans in Congress roll over, and they approve this bill, what will happen is that they will then be responsible, not Donald Trump. And so I think Republicans are having second thoughts. What happens if the great, big, beautiful bill does not pass? Donald Trump's agenda will be extremely curtailed. And let me say a word about the Supreme Court. With 3 liberal justices dissenting, the Supreme Court ruled that a person held in this country can be deported to any country, not necessarily their country of origin or birth. This is a terrible decision. The idea that we may ship off people to other nations because, we don't want to house them ourselves, or because we think it's the necessary thing to do, just shocks me. It's completely, in my judgment, un-American. And let me go a step further. As President Trump attempts to curtail illegal immigration, it is clear he is also catching in his net people who are here legally, citizens, people who depend on the fact that they are with their families and they are safe right here in the United States of America. More and more we are hearing reports of what Donald Trump is doing. And I have to tell you, it's a disgrace. This is not the America that says to an individual, we are here to protect you. No, quite the contrary. To send people, whether it is to Libya or to South Sudan, it's nuts. And I hope that sanity is restored. What does disappoint me is that the Supreme Court seems to be so driven along partisan lines that what would seem reasonable only a few years ago is now, in the eyes of a majority of the Supreme Court, something that they are determined to do, even though they must know in their heart of hearts how unconscionable it is. As you can tell, there's a lot to talk about on this podcast. I try to do it succinctly, simply, and directly. I know that some of you agree and some of you disagree, but I encourage you to continue listening, spread the word, and by all means, give me your comments. Thanks for tuning into another episode of Around the Political World with John Rothman. I am John Rothman. Make sure to follow along and let me know your thoughts on the show by leaving a review on Apple Podcasts and sharing an episode with a friend or colleague so we can continue to grow and expand, which is, of course, our goal. Let me repeat, do interact with me. Facebook, LinkedIn, and of course my direct email. I appreciate all of your comments. And to Go Zoger, thank you again for the wonderful production work you do to ensure that this podcast is up and running every weekday. I am John Rothman, and you are listening to Around the Political World with John Rothman. Heaven only knows where we'll be tomorrow, but I can tell you, I'll be right here, offering you thoughts and insights, and I hope you will be here with me. See you tomorrow.